to get started. Thanks, team.
Is that a going silencing my name?
I just whip the eyes around, and if I can see people talking, Councillor Halliday, going to get started. And it's so funny seeing you kind of adjust yourselves and get back in line, so great. Cool, welcome everyone, welcome councillors, community board members, our iwi partners who I believe aren't with us yet but who will hopefully be jumping on throughout the meeting, and we've got a few people on Zoom, so we've got Councillor Kofidge, Councillor Spires, Mark de Haast and Andrew Michael. Welcome also to staff who will be supporting us through the agenda today, and also for your work in getting us to this point, and the papers that we have in front of us and all the work that's gone in to create them, recognising too that all the people who were a part of that won't be in the room, but we appreciate all of their mahi. So I'm going to pass over to Councillor Kirby for our council blessing.
Kia ora, Sophie, thank you. As we deliberate on the issues before us, we trust that we will reflect positively on the communities we serve. Let us all seek to be effective and just, so that with courage, vision and energy, we provide positive leadership in a spirit of harmony and compassion.
Kia ora, Councillor Kirby. Item number 3, apologies. We have an apology from the Mayor, who is on an appointment panel to put someone in the role of community and youth kind of liaison for the police. So she is, and that's for our specific area as well, so she is currently occupied with that appointment. So are there any other apologies we want to add to that of the Mayor's? Nope, don't appear to be any, so can I have someone to move those apologies? Councillor Pravanov, seconder. Councillor Wilson, all those in favour? Aye, that is against, that's carried. Declarations of interest relating to the items on the agenda have not been made aware of any prior to the meeting, and I'm not seeing any hands raised. That's perfect. Item number 6, members' business, leaves of absence. Haven't been made aware of any, but again, you can go through the Mayor and her office. Matters of an urgent nature have also not been made aware of any that have landed themselves on our agenda today. So that takes us through to updates. Item number 7 on our agenda, and 7.1, review of council older persons housing project scope. So inviting Darren and Laura up to the table, and as they make their way to the table, just would like to remind elected members that this has been through the Social Sustainability Subcommittee, so there was an opportunity to ask questions through that forum. Yeah, Councillor Halliday is just jogging his memory. And so it would be good to hopefully not relitigate too many of the conversations that were had there, but to instead just raise any new comments or new concerns. But we'll let the team go through their full presentation first and then come to questions. So I'll pass over to Darren. Or Chris, if she wants. No, Darren, straight to Darren. Kia ora, Darren.
Thank you, and morena, everyone. So as the chair has just sort of announced, this is a chance for us to follow up with all of council after we had a discussion with the Social and Sustainability Subcommittee. In terms of that discussion, is it on? It's always a good start, I think.
I may just note, at the Social Sustainability Committee meeting, we had advised that we would be providing our tenants in current housing with us of the review, and I just want to confirm that has occurred. We delivered those yesterday, and so we also let them know that we'd be talking to you today, that they could join us, or that it would be online. So I'll pass back to Darren.
And we have a copy of those letters that were delivered here, and we'll make that available on the LG Hub as well, so you have a copy of that correspondence. So in terms of the feedback that we received through the subcommittee discussion, we've used that to add to the project plan, and you'll see that reflected in this discussion here also. We've received some really good feedback in terms of obviously the portfolio, the financials, understanding that we're looking at the sort of the scope and the communication process. So making sure that we refine those parts of the project brief and project plan. In terms of council's older persons housing policy, This was last comprehensively reviewed in 1993. That doesn't mean there hasn't been reviews or changes through that period. It just means there hasn't been a sort of a comprehensive review of that policy. Obviously, since that time, there's been a lot of change. You know, the way people live, obviously the makeup of the community, and the way that council operates, and also the rules that govern the way that, you know, housing is provided in the community. So in terms of the review, what we're keen to make sure that we undertake, or that comes out of the review, is that we consider council's role in the provision of older persons housing and explore options for the ongoing provision of this activity. The review the current asset and tenancy management services, and ensure that services remain appropriate to meet current and future needs, and then we explore opportunities to expand or diversify the portfolio. In terms of the portfolio, so there's 118 single-storey, one-bedroom units, and these are located across the district. So there's units in Otaki, Waikanai, Paraparaumu, and Paikakariki. The units are all in a mix of configurations, so there's no one standard sort of, you know, design or look and feel of the units. It comes down to the era they were built in and also where they're located and stuff like that. The units were constructed in the sort of between the 1950s and the 1990s, with an average age of 45 years across the portfolio. In terms of management, so the council's property team manages a portfolio. They look after the tenancies and the maintenance of the portfolio, and also, you know, basically undertake the renewals program, which is in line with, you know, the long-term plan commitment. In terms of the units, so the average age is about 76 years, and there's a fairly even split in terms of male and female tenants, slightly more female tenants. There's currently 60 people on the waiting list, and actually the annual turnover is quite low. So, you know, the average age, or the average tenure in the units is about 7 years, and since 1 July 2022, there's been 5 people placed in units across the district. 3 of those in Otaki, and I think 1 in Paraparaumu and 1 in Waikanai. In terms of the next pages, so those give you a bit of a feel for where the units are located, and a bit of a look at some of the, you know, how the units look. It also shows you know, a status. It's a little bit old now, but we'll update as part of this process of where they are in terms of making sure they comply with Healthy Homes requirements. So there's some that already, you know, have been through that process, some that are in the process, and some that are yet to start the process. And so you've got the, you know, makeup of the Otaki units. Waikanai, there's only 3 in Waikanai. Paraparaumu, 45, and then 4 in Paikakariki. And all these slides, if they're not already on LG Hub, will be loaded onto LG Hub. So in terms of the current situation, so as you're aware, we're going through the process of making sure they comply with the Healthy Homes regulations. We're also continuing with refurbishment work as part of the renewals program. And so that's a continuing process, and it's something that we need to do no matter what. So no matter what we're, you know, in terms of this process, we do need to ensure that we comply with those requirements. In terms of accessibility, there will be some improvement to accessibility, but we won't have a fully, you know, accessible units in terms of current standards, and that's probably due to age and those sorts of things. There haven't been any new units constructed for 28 years. You know, when you look at the sites, there definitely appears to be an opportunity to do more, but we would need to go through a process of actually working out feasibility and making sure there's no issues that we don't know about. So again, part of the process that we want to go through. Also, are these complexes in the right places? You know, in terms of people's access to services and public transport and all those sorts of things. You know, we know that this is, you know, a significant issue, and again, a chance to say, are they in the best locations? One of the big things that's changed in terms of the way that these things, the approach and things that we need to consider is access to subsidies. So currently, the the rent on the units is set at 30% of the income for the individual or the couple, and this is based on NZ Super and the accommodation supplement, and then ratepayers meet the difference in terms of the cost to provide it. In terms of the LTP requirement, there's a requirement that the rental income covers between 50 and 80% of operating cost, and that the current rents are set at $174 for a single occupant and $252 for couples. Yeah. I was proposing to take questions at the end. But
Yeah, if we could take questions at the end. But feel free to pop your mic on now so we can get you in the queue. Yeah.
In terms of the, so Kāinga Ora and community housing providers are able to access the income-related rent subsidy. This is set at 25% of the tenant's net income. And then basically the government covers the difference between the rental payment and the market rent. And so I think that's quite an important difference in terms of the market rent as opposed to what it costs us to actually provide the portfolio. And obviously that 25% is again, a help in terms of the tenants in terms of 25% as opposed to the 30%. Councils are not eligible to for the subsidy. So this has led to many councils across the country actually reviewing the way that they provide these services. So Christchurch, Wellington recently have all gone through this process, and a number of others as well. In terms of financials, so we can see there the operating result for the last 2 financial years. You'll see that the team's been working to reduce and the ratepayer contribution, and that's been a process of just making sure that rentals are set at the right levels. There was a lot of work done a couple of years ago to make sure people were receiving the accommodation supplement and all those sorts of things. So the team's been really progressively working with tenants as well. In terms of the current financial year, so they're looking to decrease the contribution to 26%, or about $400,000, and that works out to about $3,000 per unit per annum. It's not a requirement for the units to make a profit under the current policies. In terms of housing need, we've had a few discussions about housing need in the last sort of few months. Obviously, there is a big increase in terms of housing need, and in this age group, in terms of the over 65s, is one of the ones that is expected to increase further. There's likely to be an increase in terms of social housing need as more and more people continue to be renters, as part of their whole of life in terms of home occupation. But what we found was that there's a lot of there's a real limited choice in terms of for older people. There's a limitation in terms of the size, but also making sure it's fit for purpose for their needs. And so it's likely to be that they will be one of the most affected parts of the community. There was also some discussion about the needs for older women increasing because of changes in circumstances such as divorce or widowhood and stuff like that. So more need in that area also. So in terms of the project mandate, so this was raised as part of the long-term plan. It was discussed in terms of obviously the growing housing need in the community, and it was discussed about the opportunity around councils' existing older persons housing sites. And it was also raised in the housing strategy as one of the actions in terms of the housing strategy also. So in terms of scope, so I suppose we want to make sure we're clear in terms of what's in scope and what's out of scope. So in terms of scope for the project, so we're looking to explore council's role in the provision of housing for older people, to confirm the target group. There's definitely some things that we need to consider in terms of the current settings. Identify opportunities for sustainable growth of the portfolio. Identify appropriate governance and policy settings, and ensure consistency with other government strategies and policies. So making sure that these are considered in terms of everything else going on across council. In terms of outer scope, so the existing renewals program, the Healthy Homes program, and the implementation of any changes to the portfolio. So in terms of the outcomes, so actually what do we want to achieve in terms of an outcome from this work? So we want to make sure that we can support the ongoing sustainable delivery of older persons housing, that we do understand options to grow the current portfolio in an affordable manner to meet the current and the future need, so the ongoing need. Ensure that those policy settings and governance arrangements are optimised to provide safe, affordable and accessible options. That we improve the opportunity for people to actually age in place in Kāpiti. So instead of having to move away, that they actually have access to homes and accommodation within their community. That we are clear about the role of council and they've got the right structure and policies in place, and that we can ensure access to other support services for tenants. So, we've discovered through the housing needs that, housing's one part of the whole, environment, but it's making sure they get access to the services they need as well. And obviously the other really important factor here is making sure that the residents in the units and the community as a whole remain fully informed through this process, and that they've had the opportunity to be involved in the process as well. So in terms of key stages, so we're looking to confirm the scope this month. The next few months basically doing a stock take, investigation, looking at options and working through that process, undertaking option analysis through July and August, having discussions with council about those options and getting feedback from council and understanding what the next steps would be after those. Obviously, if we need to undertaking public consultation, again, it comes down to the options and discussion with council. And if we need to, again, a decision by council in early 2024. So obviously, communication through this process is really important. And we know from experiences that we've seen with other councils that this is a challenging space, and it is a concerning space for a lot of people. So making sure that we have a good communication engagement plan is crucial, that we really focus on our tenants through this process and make sure that they're at the heart of this and actually understand their welfare through this process, that we do have clear ongoing communication channels, and that we do remain open in terms of ongoing discussion through the process. We want to be clear about what we're trying to achieve through this review and making sure people understand the purpose of it and what we're trying to achieve, and working with the communications team to do that, to make sure that obviously the community, yourselves, and our key partners are informed through the process. So in terms of just some of those initial pieces, as we mentioned before, we've delivered a letter to the residents to make sure that they're aware that this is being proposed, that we will be releasing communications to the wider community following these discussions and that sort of thing, that we have key talking points for yourselves to make sure that you can engage with the community about this matter, and you have the support that you need in terms of those communications, and that we do have regular updates, that there's not big gaps between the discussion with you about this and the community. And open to questions.
Epic. Thanks for the fulsome overview, Darren. We have a few questions, so if you've got one, just pop your mic on now. And those of you on Zoom, welcome Hiriwai Paki, who's joined us as well. Kia ora. If you've got a question and you're on Zoom, just pop your hand up or put something in the chat and we'll make sure to come to you. Councillor Wilson.
Thanks for that, Darren. I should just mention, by the way, Son, I've tested clear for COVID for 2 days, so I don't have, just in case anybody's worried.
Disclaimer.
Right. Yeah, no, you're all good. Right, okay, so a couple of questions. Around the price that people pay, single pays 174 and a couple pays 252. And I know there's some basic maths in there, but you're asking two people to live in the same space that one person's living in. So what you're saying is we're saying you two have to live in a slightly more cramped place and we're going to charge you more for that. I just think we need to have a bit of a rethink around that. I know on a per head basis it makes sense, but it doesn't make sense in terms of the amount of space that they have available to them, and especially given that the average age is 76. So anyway.
So your question is
Well, the question is, are we going to? The question is, should we have a look at that? The answer is yes, but I don't know if you agree with me.
Did you want to comment, Darren?
Do I need to respond?
Yeah, no, I just answered his own question.
But you may
Okay,
not
well,
agree.
well, maybe let's carry on.
I am aware that when the team looks at who is going to go into these units, they do consider not all the units are the same. So some units are bigger, and so if there is the opportunity to put a couple in a slightly bigger unit, I understand that they do that sort of thing. So again, they take judgment around that. I don't know if Mike wants to add anything more in terms of that, but yeah.
Yeah, Mike?
Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair. So we did look at rents just 18 months ago in some detail, and whenever we look at them in the sense that you're talking about, Councillor, it's quite a big deal. So I guess as part of the review, we could look at that again, but just need to be aware of the can that we're opening when we do that.
Yeah.
And actually, speaking of Mike, just a wrap for Mike and Lynn McMillan. These you get macro issues and micro issues in these sort of situations. There was one just very recently about a lady who had an issue, and these guys, and we were in terms of. This goes to about engagement, the engagement process. Social media can be a cruel place, and we were getting hammered. KCDC was getting hammered for no just reason. Anyway, it got sorted out very, very quickly. So raps to you guys, and it was specifically related to this kind of housing issue. So the next question was around that comms, because wherever other councils have explored the council's role, usually what that's meant in the immediate public perception is, oops, they're getting ready to flog it off, right? And so I'm hoping that our comms is ahead of that.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's not part of our thinking, but just understanding that that's what the initial public perception probably is, and so you kind of, I'd like to think that we would be getting ahead of that.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Just to say that our intention would be that we will be sharing comms before they're going out, so that you have visibility of that. But we are very aware of those points and appreciate you highlighting them, and we'll make sure that we've covered those off.
And just a last point around the financials. The financials that were presented for the last couple of years would make this look like a bit of a loss leader for council. I think it would be really interesting to have a look at the figures, say, over the last 10 years. And I think you would find that these aren't quite the financial burden that they look like they are in the last couple of years, because it's been quite a works program, etc. So overall, because this goes to my view about expanding the number of these things. So that was just, I don't know if those numbers are available.
I would agree with that. There's definitely things like COVID and those sort of things that did cause impacts in terms of rental increases and stuff like that during that
healthy
period.
homes.
Yes.
Yeah. Cool. That's me.
Cool. Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Just to remind councillors as well, if we can stick to questions in this section as well, if you've got comments to make in relation to how the comms should or could look, probably best to save those for debate. Community Board Member B. Larissy.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a clarification, really, Darren. So, in terms of units, 66 in Otaki, 3 in Waikanae, 45 Paraparaumu, and 4 in Paikokariki. So, 0 in Raumati. And I was just curious, is that something that we can look to address through in partnership with Kāinga Ora? That's what I'm elected to do, right?
I suppose in terms of the scope, we're definitely keen to make sure the units are in the right location for the community, and so definitely looking at where those community units need to be will be one of the parts. And I think the ability to work with partners, again, also part of the process.
So
But it's good.
potentially.
Yeah,
yes.
but definitely it's a good point, and we'll take that on board in terms of that.
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Councillor Coe.
Thank you. Look, this is a really, really important area. I just want to clarify in terms of the scope, whether we're just talking about council-owned rental properties, because to me, I believe council has a role in facilitating access to affordable rental accommodation, and that can be through encouraging people to make better use of their backyards in terms of, putting tiny homes on there or whatever, or providing an information service to help people solve their housing needs themselves and in other ways besides relying on council. So I just wanted to check whether that is part of the scope that you're looking at, because I think there is potential to solve this problem in other ways.
Yeah, look, so definitely this is one of the actions in our housing strategy, and so as part of that we are looking at other ways that accommodation and all those things can be provided in the community, and so definitely we want to make sure that when we're looking at this project we do understand how it fits with those other pieces as well. So that would definitely be something we can make sure we are clear about in the scope as well.
So that's not necessarily part of this work, but you will be looking at it in that context?
The wider context, and we'll make sure that we add it in terms of the things that we consider.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great, thanks Councillor Coe. Community Board Member Simon.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Darren. Now, a couple of questions I have is about the waiting list. How long is the waiting list? How long does it take for someone to get a house? Also, in regards to that, who is on the waiting list? Councillor Warwick and the board have been talking about disenfranchised people and coming into our communities, and they're being extracted from one community to another. Just wondering who's coming into these houses, how is the wait list decided, and how long do people have to wait?
It's not a simple answer. We did ask this question because we thought it would be an important one to understand. It depends on a number of factors. So there is preferences, so people may want to be in Paraparaumu or Otaki for different reasons in terms of their community or access to the health system in terms of, they're in the, Capital Coast, or they're in, other, health boundaries. So it does depend on what they're looking for. We can come back with some more information and discuss that, in terms of more detail. But as you can see, the turnover is quite low. There's definitely sort of an average sort of tenure of about 7 years. In terms of
I think Mike might want to contribute as well to this.
Oh, sorry, Darren. Yeah. And I was just going to add things, Darren. That because somewhere like Otaki, it's kind of not what you think. The waiting list in Otaki actually isn't as long as it is in other parts of the districts. So the demand isn't necessarily where the units currently are, which is part of the point that Darren's making. Is we haven't for historical reasons, it doesn't actually make sense where our investment portfolio actually is at the moment.
So is the waiting list of Kāpiti people for Kāpiti housing?
As I understand it, so there's 60 people on the waiting list at the moment, and it's a mixture of people that meet the criteria in terms of the housing units.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, can I just add, Simon, that obviously the MSD housing waiting list is run and operated separately to council-owned housing. So people who are in our district would be more likely to be applying for housing in our district. With the MSD housing wait list, you could be having somebody from Invercargill apply and then get a house in Kāpiti. So it's very different because it's needs-based.
Right, thank you. Next question I have is in regards to profitability, deferred maintenance, healthy housing, and what is our strategy with, how does this link with our strategy for having a council-controlled organisation, particularly focused on housing?
I'll let Mike talk about in terms of the first part of the question, but in terms of the strategy around the housing entity.
Yes.
So that we have kept those conversations separate. We understand that this is quite a sensitive area that needs its own discussion and consultation. So we have kept those separate discussions at this stage.
Okay, so at some stage they may merge?
Look, I suppose this is part of the process in terms of understanding what is the best approach going forward, but making sure we don't predetermine that outcome.
Yeah, thanks, Darren. I think Mike might have something to add again on this one.
Just in terms of the first part of your question, this is a pretty well managed asset class. We do have a proactive renewals program in place, which means we're probably getting longer life out of these units than we otherwise would. So we don't have any worries in terms of deferred maintenance. We have other issues with maintenance, but they're kind of technical. And generally speaking, it's a well managed and well funded assets class overall.
Almost there. Comms. What comms channels are we using just to avoid issues with communications, especially also given the age of our tenants?
Yeah, so look, in terms of our tenants, we understand that there's a need to make sure that the channels are suitable for them. So, like, as we said yesterday, we made sure we did a letter drop to make sure they get that direct in terms of emails, in terms of letters, physical letters. And so we will continue that approach as well as using our traditional comms in terms of social media, the newspaper and all those sorts of things as well.
Great, thank you. Final one, just a general for everyone. Can we make these slides available earlier? I mean, I would have liked to have read this last night and actually had a bit of a cogitation. I had a look on LG Hub just now and I can't find it, so either I've missed it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but valid point. I think that's probably something we can take offline and see how we can do that a bit better.
Thanks, team.
It's on there now, though. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Simon. Councillor Warwick, and also Councillor Cofford will be with you soon. Just aware that you're sitting patiently on Zoom. Councillor Warwick.
My question is, as a tenant, council can't get rent relief from government, but if we are to redevelop any of these sites or add to them, is council as a tenant able to get government assistance to do that side of it? And that'll probably come back in your, that's cool, but just a question, is that an option? Because otherwise it's a rate funded, it would be quite expensive.
Yeah, so at the moment, council is not eligible for things like the income rent related subsidy. It's only available to community housing providers for the kaingaora, and so we wouldn't be eligible for it.
Is that for building more?
In terms of building more, again, there's different funds that come up all the time, and so you'll be aware that we've recently made an application in terms of the Affordable Housing Fund. Again, that's a slightly different sort of targeted sort of approach, and so we continue as these funds and those sorts of things do come up, try to explore whether we're eligible, and if we are eligible and we have the appropriate sort of project, we do make submissions. And I think what we would do as part of this, understand the feasibilities and understand the opportunity to get support for those opportunities.
Yeah.
Councillor Cofford. I'll just wait 1 second while you get unmuted and then you'll be good to go.
He's still on mute.
I don't think he can unmute himself.
Okay,
there you go.
hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I've got a technical problems here. Well, thanks, Darren. That was a really clear report. Now, you mentioned in July, August, you're going to look at options and analysis and that. Just jumping the gun a bit, probably, but what do you anticipate will be the scale of the developments that we're looking at as a council? Will we be advocating for housing supply from others, or will we be actually going into partnerships with developers and other stakeholders?
I would say it's too early for me to say at this stage. We don't have, I suppose, enough information at this stage to really sort of understand the options and what would be the best approach in terms of moving forward. So, that's something that we're really keen to do over the next few months so we can have a proper discussion about that.
Oh, thanks, Darren. The question might help form the answer, perhaps. And just moving on, I was interested in the ongoing maintenance that is carried out to these older houses, and a lot of that was answered. I know that your housing stock has had a makeover recently all round, which is really great, and they're brought up into compliance, especially with regard to insulation and the R values everywhere. Do you have any leaky buildings or any houses in the leaky building category?
Mike?
Well, I guess, Councillor, all buildings leak at some stage, but with respect to the specific provisions that I think you're talking about with respect to the weather tightness regulations, no, we do not have any of our rental stock that is being talked about today that falls into that category. We do have buildings outside this stock, but not with respect to the buildings you're talking about today.
Cool, thanks for that,
Well,
Mike.
thank you very much.
Did you have any other questions, Councillor Coford?
No, that's my lot. Thank you.
Cool, thank you. Councillor Cooper.
Just with the other councils offloading their portfolios to independent providers, social providers, will part of the review speak to those councils and those providers to understand the benefits for the tenants, the benefits for the council, and benefits for the housing state? I see that Wellington said that they, as a council, weren't good tenants. I think it was Wellington, maybe in Poro or the Hut, but certainly one of the councils. And if I look at if our litmus test is simply the healthy building test, I don't think there was a single property in green. So the question would be, are we good tenants? And do we fall into that same category as Wellington or the Hut or Poro? Good landlords, yeah. Well, they're saying they're not.
Look in terms of some of the buildings being in green, there are buildings that have been through the process. Unfortunately, it's more just hard to see the green, and that number has increased through that process. So I think we do have a good focus on making sure we do provide a good quality product for our tenants. So we'll make sure that that's clearer. In terms of the process, so definitely, we will be looking at what other councils have done in terms of how they manage their portfolio. A lot of the times they have changed the ownership to qualify for the subsidy.
Yeah.
And so it's about actually how do they get access to the subsidy to make sure the portfolio is sustainable and can be delivered. And it also means that they can, support tenants, in terms of, such as us, we look at 30% of their income, whereas the subsidy's at 25%. So all those sorts of things are factors that we will discuss and work through and explain what others have done through that process.
Yeah,
So,
I think Chris,
yeah.
sorry,
Sorry,
before you carry on.
I just want to add that part of us exploring options will also to sort of cover, I think, to Councillor Wilson's comment about the opportunity to expand the portfolio, is whether there's an opportunity for you as council to raise issues to government about the current settings. So at the moment, the fact that you can't get subsidies through council might be an issue that they actually need to address, rather than everybody having to change what they do to fit in with that. So that would be something that would also be coming back to consider for you to consider when we come back.
Yes. So for me, I'd like for the review to explore that option that we may not be the best provider. If there are better options for our elderly and the portfolio, then that I'd like to see it explored in the review.
Cool. Thanks for
you.
that, Councillor Cooper. Yeah, definitely an interesting point. And when we think about those kind of the outcomes that we're seeking to achieve, I think, if we kind of have that as the kind of guiding light, and then how we best deliver on that, it's important we consider all options for sure. Councillor Halliday.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. I know we're not.
Thought we decided, to cut
right.
that stuff.
Look, I've got 4 quick questions. First of all, are the tenants able to apply for the accommodation supplement through
Yes.
MSD?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yep.
because I do recall in relation to what Councillor Wilson was talking to in regards to the pricings, that was one of the considerations we took on board when we have to fix the rents.
And I must say that the team is really proactive in terms of supporting tenants through that process.
Yeah, so there is sort of relief in that space there as well. That was a concern of ours when we looked at all this.
The second one sort of touches that again. Kaingoa, do they have older person specific policy around housing as such, or is it sort of a general mix sort of scenario?
I am not sure. I would need to.
Again, we'll follow that one through the committee as a general question.
Yeah, good
that sort of
question.
thing.
Good question.
And that can be about relationships and that sort of thing as well. When you showed the figures up there, I noticed the 1.3 odd million was classified as OPEX rather than CAPEX as such. And I was just curious about that. Because it's not a new build versus we're doing renewals at the moment. Not renewals. We're doing upgrades at the moment. Upgrades and OPEX cost as such. Is that why that figure's quite high, or should we be looking at that being a CAPEX cost as such?
Thanks, Council. Renewals most definitely are CAPEX. We're very careful about this. But when you own an asset class, they still need to be maintained, and that maintenance can always be allocated as CAPEX. So the cost of maintaining 118 units is around about the figure that you mentioned, and that's just like owning your own home. There are some stuff you have to do that you don't put on the mortgage. You have to pay for it on a kind of more current basis.
So for clarity, I guess maintenance is OPEX and development is CAPEX.
Simply, yes. Very simply, yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Any other questions, Councillor Halliday? Cool. Oh, 1 second. Yeah. Go for it.
I note in the next point, the next piece of work we're looking at, 8.2, that housing's in the current quarter with regards to the maintenance asset management plan, where that sort of scenarios is work being done. When we're talking about this review, I'm curious. I appreciate that in the last 3 years, what we've done is a lot of high-level stuff. Okay, but what has constantly come through is, look, we've got housing there. How can we put more housing on there? I'm just seeing that getting pushed out a bit more. I'm just curious to know, or get a bit of an indicator, when are we actually having that conversation with regards to we can review, we can look at, we can put asset management plan, but when are we actually looking at the ability to put more houses in that space as such? Is that sort of this year, next year?
I feel through the options analysis is when we'll be tabling with you and working through the range of things you can consider to do.
Yep.
We would want to lock that into the LTP. Upcoming LTP discussions, so that we're ensuring we understand the cost and choices you have more broadly for the priorities that you as council may want to set for the next 3 years and maybe longer around this and other issues.
Alrighty, thank you.
Cool. Awesome, and sorry for just kind of dropping this in randomly, but just for our external speaker who's still sitting on Zoom, we are going to be moving item 8.5, the LGFA draft statement of intent 2023 to 26, and the half-year report up to item 8.1 under reports, just so we can have that grouped with contracts under delegated authority as well. So just to note that you won't be waiting right until the very end of our agenda, because this conversation has taken a little bit longer than we would have anticipated, but it's a useful one to be having for sure. Councillor Kirby.
Thank you. Just a quick question in terms of clarity of the key and the maps and the colours assigned to each location. They don't match very well. So my question is, how many of them are vacant at the moment? Because there's no colour for vacancy.
Yeah, we'll pass over to Mike.
Councillor, we're around about 97% occupied, and the only reason we're not 100% is because of the few units we have taken out for renewal. So we're fully occupied, other than the renewals.
Thank you. Just a comment to follow up on that. Could we look at the colours on those diagrams to make sure they match the keys so that it's really clear for us and
Good
anyone
point.
else in the public who may read this later? That'd be great. Thank you.
Awesome, thanks for that. Councillor Pravanov.
Yeah, thank you. I sort of wanted to, this is more of an admin thing, and in fact Lawrence has just made comment with an assumption that this is going to be in the public arena. So this is an update. This presentation it's my understanding, only goes in the hub. It's not actually made available to the public. And I suppose that applies to all updates. And as this is a public meeting, I would like, and I know I've talked to staff about this, about finding a way to ensure that these updates that have presentations are made available to the public, please.
Yep. Pass that to Chris.
I can confirm that Darren Edwards, the Chief Executive, has agreed that they will be added to the website alongside the agenda. The Democracy Services team are just working through how that's going to occur. So there's a bit of work in the background to make sure that we can make that happen. So be assured it will be put up on the website.
Yeah.
Thank you. Just a subsequent question to that. So they will be put up on the agenda with the agenda rather than waiting until the minutes of that meeting have been approved?
I think Steffi's going to come and answer this time.
So at the moment, the process that we're discussing is that it will go up afterwards, because that would require the presentations to be available when the agendas run. So if they are available, we could discuss that, but that's not part of the process discussion at the moment.
Yeah, I think this is probably something we're best to take offline, because the context of this discussion is specifically in relation to council older persons housing and the scope of the review that we're undertaking, but recognise that that's an important point, and it sounds like staff are doing some work and connects in with what was mentioned, I think, by Simon around having the slides available to elected members earlier as well, so that we can have some time to percolate on questions and bring those with us. So yeah, we'll take that offline, Councillor Rana.
Thank you.
Cool. Councillor Wilson, just a really quick question, because you have already...
It is a quick question, actually. It's just in terms of feedback from tenants, and just to address Glenn's point, anecdotally, I think we are very good landlords, the feedback that I've had talking to people in a number of these units. But in terms of formalised feedback, do we survey, only the average age is 76, so maybe they don't care, but... Do we survey tenants? Do we have a tenant satisfaction methodology? Just for finding out what they would like.
Yes, we do, but I have to say the uptake's quite low.
Cool, thanks for that. Councillor Wilson. Community Board Chair Glenn Olsen.
Yeah, just a question. I'm just looking at the financials of this, and I was just wondering that we have the ratepayer contribution and the income from the rent. How do we account for rates on these? Does the council pay rates on the properties of, if it was any other owner, they'll be paying rates on these? How do we account for that in the cost of the services? Does that go into the ratepayer contribution, or is it just not accounted for? And if we're not charging ourselves rates for these, what about our partners that are providing social housing of the same? Are we charging those rates? Because, of course, if we're not charging ourselves rates to house older people, why are we charging other people who are doing the same?
Yeah, I think we'll pass that on to Mike. Thanks. Yeah, here you go.
We do pay rates on our own property. The kicker there is that the Crown doesn't pay rates on its property. So, as you know, which might be the point of your question.
Yeah. Cool. Is that all good?
That's right. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. If you just want to pop your mic off. Cool. Thank you. Awesome. I think that's all of our questions on this topic. But again, I'm sure the team are happy to take questions offline as well, and specifically the sharing of this information more broadly. We'll take that one offline, and some questions around kind of Kāinga Water and their connection into potentially helping us deliver on some of those key outcomes we're hoping to achieve. Cool. Thanks, Darren. Thanks, Laura. So we're going to now move on to item 8, reports. And first up, we're going to have the LGFA draft statement of intent 2023 to 26 and the 2022 to 23 half-year report. So we're just moving, for clarification, moving item 8.5 up to 8.1 and then shifting the rest down. So I believe we've got Mark online and Andrew who will be walking us through this report. Oh, cool, and Jing. Awesome. Welcome, Jing.
Thank you.
Thank you, through Madam Chair and Molina councillors. So I'm here to introduce Andrew Mickle from LGFA, the local government funding agency, to present you the draft statement of intent for 23-26 and also their half-year report to the 31st of December 2022. Andrew is here with us online, so as Mark, and so he'll present the report to you. I need to note that including in their forecast, the assumption of the Three Waters reform program is actually outside because we do have a lot of uncertainties around the Three Waters reform program. So just please be aware of that. And Andrew will talk you through their strategic priorities, the objectives, and the performance targets. So thank you all.
Thanks, Andrew. And just for elected members, we'll save questions until the end, if you're happy with doing it that way, Andrew, but sing out if otherwise.
Morena, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to present to you. I'll try and keep my comments sort of reasonably brief, so I'll just give you a quick update on LGFA's activities and then talk to the SOI. So I'll just share my screen with you. So is that coming through? Hopefully. So in terms of recent developments, LGFA had a record amount of lending in the last 12 months. So we lent over $3 billion to the sector. We had 5 new councils join, so that now takes us up to 77 member councils. The only council that's not a member is Chatham Islands. And we now have 3 CCOs that we do direct lending to, and we have a further 3 CCOs that are looking to join. But one of the reasons we introduced sort of CCOs was that when Waikato Water was a concept, we wanted to be able to lend to that organisation. So if the sector goes down the route of having water CCOs, then we'll be well positioned to be able to assist the sector in that. We've introduced some new products, so we now do standbys. We've had a lot of focus on green, social and sustainable lending, including a loan to Christchurch's Social Housing Trust. So it's quite interesting to hear your discussions, but we've had quite a bit to do with Christchurch's Social Housing Trust. We've got a $1.5 billion facility with the Crown, so that goes out for a 10-year sort of period, and we're maintaining our AAA credit rating with S&P. Also, we have the objective to assist the councils with Three Waters, but as already has been raised, that's quite uncertain. In terms of our organisational structure, we have 10 staff members. We've added a couple of new members over the past year, so ahead of sustainability to do a lot in terms of the social and green sort of lending. We've also added a data management strategist, so to assist with building a better database in terms of all the financial information we sort of collect. So those things do nothing to add to profitability in terms of green and social lending, but it's an area we want to be in order to assist councils in that sort of space. In terms of our operating performance, so in recent years we've had a operating gain of around $10 million. It's a little bit lower going forward, and I'll touch on that when I get to the SOI. In terms of our past performance, in terms of our objectives, we've met all of our objectives except one. One that we're very pleased about is the satisfaction rate from member council. So our target there is to get 85% satisfaction score. In the last year, we had 100% of member council satisfied with the performance of LGFA. So I think that's good that we're fulfilling our core role in providing access to finance for the council members. They're the other ones. The only one we haven't met is our carbon reduction management plan. We have one in place and we have a target in 2030 to get to. What we didn't have was interim targets, so the steps along the way to 2030. So while we've reduced our emissions versus our base year, we have to put in place a plan to show that we're making steady progress over the years out to sort of 2030. So that's just something that we're currently sort of working on. In terms of our draft SOI, I might just talk on sort of three areas, so three things that you've sort of raised in the agenda. The first is the sort of profitability, and when you look at the profit out for the next 3 years, it's sort of roughly between 8 and 10 million, a little bit less than what we've achieved historically. The reason for that is we now have to have a much larger portfolio of liquid assets. So historically, we held around 500 million of investments. So that just enables us, if a council wants to borrow next week, we can sell down those assets and make a loan to them. We're now holding around $2.5 billion. That reflects that our lending book is now a lot bigger, but it also reflects that there's a lot more volatility in global financial markets, and we saw that with the recent banking crisis, that when things like that happens, it's possible that you can go through a period where it's harder even for highly rated entities to issue when investors become risk averse. So the board's made the decision to hold a lot bigger portfolio of liquid assets. So with $2.5 billion plus the Crown's $1.5 billion standby facility, it gives us, enough money that even if we couldn't issue more debt, we'd be able to lend to the sector for 18 months out to sort of 2 years, which is typically when crises happen, they get resolved within a month or two. So I think that sort of future-proofs us and guarantees we can do lending to councils. The other area has been touched on is Three Waters. So we made the assumption in the draft that Three Waters would continue to remain with councils. We know that that may or may not happen. Around a third of our lending is Three Water related when we look at the DIA breakdown of the data. We will look at any new information that develops over the next sort of few months and change the numbers when we do the final SO, when we adopt the final SOI in June this year. But as you can probably appreciate, the uncertainties causing considerable challenges, not only to us, but in terms of the whole sector, in terms of future forecasting and planning. But it could be we're an entity where, if councils repaid a lot of Three Water debt, then we might sort of drop down a bit in terms of our lending portfolio. It could also be that our debt book grows if we're involved in financing water entities in some form. But at the moment, we just don't know what those outcomes will be. The last area is in terms of sustainability. This is something we've put significant resources into in the past year. We're about to launch our own sustainable bond based on sustainable lending that we've done to a number of councils. So we're doing individual project lending in terms of green or social borrowing. I touched on the Christchurch's Social Housing Trust is one that we're very proud of. And we've also just recently launched climate action loans. So councils can borrow for any reason they want if they borrow through a climate action loan, which would be linked to their emission reduction plan. So I'll finish there and happy to take any questions.
Kia ora, Andrew. Was there anything that other staff wanted to say from Council? Jing, was there anything you wanted to add before we open for questions?
Yeah, the reason we presented these reports is because LGFA is actually governed by most of the councils, and we are one of the shareholders of LGFA. All our borrowings are from LGFA, so hence this report. So happy to take any questions. Andrew's online. Thank you.
Awesome. Councillor Halliday.
Through you, Madam Chair. Two questions I had. One of them actually was answered. It was in relation to how the Three Waters is going to fit into things, which is the big unknown. And that's so I do appreciate that being included. One question I had, with Auckland withdrawing from LGNZ, I'm just curious to know how that, or if that impacts LGFA at all. And if the answer is no, my next question is then, why not?
In terms of Auckland withdrawing from LGNZ, that was their decision. My view is it won't impact the Three Waters discussion. There's already a mayoral group which comprises Auckland Council that, as I understand it, have been having discussions with the Minister of Local Government. So that took place, a meeting a couple of weeks ago. So the way it looks to me is if it's the councils now speaking directly and engaging directly with the Minister of Local Government rather than LGNZ doing that discussions on behalf of the sector. So I don't think that's going to have any influence in terms of the outcomes.
I guess I should perhaps rephrase that question. It's more on the line, I'm assuming, or I think it's fair to assume that Auckland's a large borrower with LGFA, and they enjoy discounted borrowing because of the status of being included in this. But it's on the proviso they're involved that discount, I would have thought, would have been linked to actually being a member of LGNZ. Is that not the case?
LGFA's lending rates to councils is based on council's external credit rating, or if they don't have a credit rating, then there's a margin that applies to unrated councils. So Auckland don't get any preferential treatment versus other councils. So for example, they have a AA credit rating, so their base lending margin's 20 basis points, which is exactly the same as what Kāpiti District Council gets.
Sorry, I'll rephrase the question again. Auckland has elected to withdraw from NZ in local government New Zealand.
So is your question around the connection between LGNZ and LGFA?
LGNZ, no. I'm just wanting to know, I'm wanting to know, there are reasons why we've joined and are part of LGFA, and LGFA's geared itself towards supporting councils, and that's in relation to it being done through LGNZ and that sort of stuff. LGFA wouldn't exist if LGNZ wasn't there. Maybe it would, but fundamentally it's run in conjunction with it, and it's a completely separate identity. I do get that, but against the open market, shall we say, versus the discounts that LGFA can get, there's an advantage for us as councils being involved in this. That's the impression that I have. Central government can borrow cheaper than LGFA, but LGFA can borrow or have money available cheaper than the standard market. Auckland's elected to withdraw from LGNZ, and I'm just curious to know what disadvantage they've got in regards to that decision with regards to the borrowing or the advantages they have of borrowing through LGFA. I have that curiosity as a shareholder.
So the decision by Auckland to withdraw from LGNZ doesn't affect their relationship with LGFA. We're entirely separate organisations, although we like to have links with sector members such as DIA
Right, okay.
and Taituara, OAG, etc. So that will have no impact on LGFA or the borrowing costs for any members.
Thanks for that.
While all council, we have 77 council members. Council members can choose to use LGFA, and all of them sort of have, but they're also free to borrow in their own name if they have opportunities that they think are better.
I appreciate that. I guess, Mike, again, it's you don't lean to people outside LG, basically local government as such, or you lean to local government or local government organisations. Okay, no, that's cool. I was just there's got to me almost
So
it should be an
80%
advantage.
owned by councils and 20% owned by the government. So the purpose of LGFA being set up is to provide financing to the sector.
Yeah.
So our mandate was expanded so we can lend to a CCO if it's 100% owned by a council. So we can do that, but we have no ability to lend to anyone else. That would require a change of the multi-issuer deed, which would require all councils to sign off on that. So it's quite a streamlined organisation.
Excellent. So could I just then, based on what you've just said, just ask for some clarity around the Christchurch entity that you guys are lending to at the moment. Is that a CCO as such, or basically an organisation that's directly linked to council? Is that correct?
Yep. So our relationship with the Christchurch Housing Trust is we make a loan to the city council and they pass it through to the trust. So it's not a direct lending relationship. We do have some direct lending relationships with CCOs, such as Invercargill City Holdings, but in this case, while they could have applied for direct membership, because it's just a single loan, the council's just preferred to sort of borrow and pass it through themselves.
Thank you for that clarity. That's just very helpful for some of the discussions we're having here at the moment as well. Lovely. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks, Councillor Halliday. Councillor Wilson.
Yeah, thanks, mate. What percentage shareholding does KCDC have?
I don't have that off the top of my head. I think it might be 200,000 shares, something in that order.
Okay.
I'll send that through to Mark.
Yeah, just as a percentage would be helpful as well. Just running with, you've got about, what, 1.5 billion that's out at the moment. How much of that would be related to Three Waters? And so the bigger question is, assuming Three Waters goes ahead and the debt transfer goes from local councils to central government and the debt is to LGFA, so there's a couple of questions around that. LGFA's capacity to get this, to deal with that debt transfer, and the other is are there any penalty clauses in a borrower arrangement if the debt is transferred?
So as it stands at the moment, we don't know exactly how the debt transfer will take place. We're aware that DIA have had meetings with individual councils, and there's some sort of proposal that potentially a council's water debt would be repaid over the next sort of 5 years. That said, it's far from certain that the model that's proposed at the moment is actually going to be the one that is the final model. So we've got over 16 billion of lending to councils at the moment. About a third of that is water related, so it would be in the order of $5 to $6 billion of LGFA's lending is related to water. When the way I would see it is when councils are repaid their water debt, which may be over up to a 5-year sort of period, they're then free to use that money how they wish. So they may well choose to sit on it and use it for capex in the next year. But they're also able to repay any maturing LGFA loan or even buy back some of their LGFA loans that exist. But it will be each council to make the decision it wants in terms of the liquidity of its own debt portfolio.
I think Jing was keen to contribute on that too.
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. So, yes, there was a discussion with the RA around the debt settlement for the 3 water-related activities for us. And so this month, we are expecting an official letter. They're going to agree the debt related to 3 waters as at 30th of June 2022. And then they are going to look at our annual report for this year and next year to add onto the debt that we've done during the CapEx projects for our 3 waters related activities. There has to be a transfer principle out as part of the 3 waters reform program that they lay out is they're going to repay our debts, not like a big check for whatever the millions of dollars we've agreed. They're looking at our debt mature date over the next 5 years from 1st of July 2024. And also because our council, we also have swaps. So we were looking at to negotiate with DRA around the timing of the repayment. And we will come back to the councils that councillors how we're going to utilise this funds when the debt transfer back. So we will reduce our debts or invest. So there is going to be more discussion around that when we know a bit more around what we're going to do with the funding we are going to receive from DRA.
Any other questions?
Yeah, well, it still goes back to the original question around are there any penalty clauses built into this in terms of or just a straight debt transfer? But again, with swaps are locked in for a period. So again, is there any penalty for the transfer? Because you can't transfer swaps, can you?
Oh, we'll go to Mark.
No.
DeHaast, he's got his hand
And
up.
Mark Haas is sitting there,
Yeah.
anxious.
Good morning, everyone. Through you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Councillor. Look, it's a fantastic question. So, you've asked, are there going to be any penalties? So the answer is yes. So if we try to repay our debt maturities before they mature, there would be a penalty. And so we're keen not to do that. And in fact, we would refuse to do that. So where the DIA is at the moment is they have sort of indicated to us, and Andrew's quite right, that this could change. But at the moment, as our debt matures over the next 5 years, that will be transferred, so there'll be no penalties. With swaps, it's exactly the same thing. So we've effectively entered into contracts with our bank for fixed terms, and if we buy out our swaps, there are penalties because the banks never lose. Effectively, we have to pay the interest that we guaranteed to pay. So I think step one is getting the letter from the DIA where they at least confirm what's actually happening with our debt. The swaps has been out of scope with DIA because the DIA are well aware that lots of us have swap portfolios where what we say is we're in the money, which basically means the cost of our swaps today are far cheaper than if we had to go and enter into swap agreements with the bank today. So when they confirm what they're doing with their swaps, at the moment they've said over 5 years they will fully meet. They're effectively underwriting our loans with LGFA for the next 5 years, and they are meeting our finance costs. So until we have it in writing, effectively what that means is that they will pay for our swap costs. So we won't break them because the government will pay them. But you're absolutely right. If we break our swaps before they mature, we pay a penalty. If we break our loans to LGFA before they mature, there's a penalty. But what we're waiting for, and the whole sector is waiting for, is for the DIA to make a definitive decision around our swap portfolio, because some of us could actually make some money if we traded our swaps in early. So it's a little bit of a watching brief at the moment. We're eagerly waiting for information, as is LGFA. There's still so many things that are unclear at this stage.
Cool. Thanks, Councillor Wilson. And it would be great to have kind of a briefing on those intricacies once there's a little bit more information, as you say, that we're all kind of on tenterhooks waiting for. So thanks for that clarification, Mark. Councillor Coe.
Yes, thank you. I just had a question around your holding of liquid assets and whether there is any potential for erosion of value of those in what is now, a rising interest rate environment, and probably significantly more so than was anticipated.
That's a very good question, and that's the issue that Silicon Valley Bank actually had, where they
exactly. That's why I asked it. Yeah.
They borrowed through. For those that don't know, they raised money through short-term deposits like banks typically do, and then because they had all this money, they then invested in longer-dated treasury bonds, and that was historically when they thought interest rates were going to stay low forever, and of course they didn't. And so when interest rates went up and then they had to sell some of those to raise liquidity, they were then forced to make a loss. LGFA has very strict rules about the interest rate risk that we can take. Most of our liquidity book is relatively short dated, so maturing within the next year. But we are limited in terms of the interest rate that we can take, so it would be impossible for us to have the same issue. So if we do buy longer dated liquid assets, then typically we will hedge that back to floating rate exposure to eliminate any interest rate risk.
Wow.
And all that's monitored in daily reports and overseen by the board.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you through the chair. Thank you, Andrew, for your very interesting presentation today. So I just wanted to ask some questions in relation to the environmental and social responsibility arm of LGFA. So in the, I don't know if you've seen the paper that we have before us, but it talks about the performance targets that we have. And so they all relate to basically climate change. And I suppose I just want to clarify whether by saying things are environmental, that they actually include the environment rather than just climate change. So in terms of that, the very specific question I want, as you mentioned that a third of the loans were related to water, what percentage of that quarter or third relates to, for example, improving the quality of water?
So when we make loans under green or sustainable sort of borrowing, we have a sort of a framework, and the framework that LGFA used fall in line with global sort of frameworks. So there's organisations that are similar to auditors, and they essentially certify that what you're doing meets a certain criteria. So in terms of Three Waters, you can't go back too far in history, so you can't sort of look at something that you built sort of 50 years ago and suddenly say that's sort of green. So it tends to be relating to new projects and things that councils are sort of doing. And so if you build a new wastewater treatment plant, for example, then it's going to have to meet a certain standard and criteria that applies to it. There's also categories for green buildings, climate adaptation sort of things. So it's quite a complex area, but these are all largely global frameworks that have evolved in sort of recent years that LGFA has adopted.
So
it's quite a complex area, so we're more than happy to come and speak to the council in more detail about all of this.
Yeah, it might be, some of those questions might be ones we can take offline. Do you have any other kind of questions you think need to be answered right at this moment?
Yeah, so I suppose really I'm trying to understand whether environmental responsibility includes improving the environment as well as climate change.
They're kind of interconnected, would you?
But there's different ways of going
multiple categories. So, like we've done a loan to Greater Wellington Regional Council that relates to the Hutt Valley River Precinct plans. So part of that project is about sort of resilience and sort of climate change, but there's other parts of that project as well. So yeah, so you start to get into some quite sort of complex sort of areas when we sort of look at all of this. So it just depends on the project, but you can do you can apply for a project under quite a wide ranging, or there's lots and lots of different sort of categories depending on what it is that you're sort of doing. So there's things around renewable energy, there's things around sort of energy efficiency, green buildings, climate adaptation. So it pretty much covers the whole scope of things that people are looking to do when it comes to sort of sustainability and climate change.
Thank you. I think it's probably something I'll take offline. Thank you.
Yeah, just on that, Councillor Provanov, as Chris just pointed out, there is reference to sustainable water and wastewater management in those different kind of more environmentally centred outcomes.
And aquatic biodiversity.
Oh yeah, and aquatic biodiversity as well on that right-hand side. And it could also be a good opportunity to get the sustainability manager at LGFA in front of the climate and environment subcommittee for some greater oversight as to the draft statement of intent that specifically is related to climate and the environment. Would that be something we could potentially look to do, Andrew?
Definitely, we'd really welcome, and that's, the LGFA board view is that, we now have the resources and we see our role as really helping councils with all of this, so they can sort of participate in this space. So, and councils are all at different stages. We would be doing a lot more in the Three Waters space in terms of lending against those assets. It's just at the moment with all the uncertainty, there's not much point doing that when the loans might only be in place for a year and then they're all going to sort of change. So once we have more certainty, we're going to be able to assist you in that area.
Awesome, thanks for that. One last quick point, Councillor Provanov, and then we'll go to Councillor Cooper, and then we'll move to the recommendations.
So I appreciate you making the comment about biodiversity. I have to say the slides that we have got in front of us, we can't actually read what it says in those boxes.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll send them through. And
yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Thanks, Andrew. No, not your fault. That's all good. Councillor Cooper.
This may actually be a question for Mark. Do we actually know how much of our loan lending is coming off in the next 5 years? What percentage of our loan that the DIA will, how much of it is actually coming out in the next 5 years, if any? And how does that affect?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Councillor. Yes, we do review our loan book actually daily. So generally speaking, we stack up to $30 million of debt that matures every year. So over the next 5 years, roughly, it's not quite $150 million yet, but over the next 5 years, about 100. What we've drawn down so far, it's about $100 million will come off. But as we go into the next annual plan and the next year and the next year, we obviously draw down, and we know that we're planning to draw $50 million of debt down next year. So roughly speaking, we don't stagger our debt to have more than $30 million of debt maturing per annum. So roughly speaking, over the next 5 years, it'll be $150 million.
So in terms of there'll be some analysis done in terms of if we're waiting, say, 3 to 5 years for a big chunk of that money, you'll obviously do the figures on whether it's cheaper to break it, or is that not? That's dictated by the government.
Yeah, look, good question. So, look, if we break it, I guess the longer dated the debt, the break costs will be more. So, if we, for example, looked at debt that's sitting in years 3 and 4 and 5, that'll cost more because the banks still claw back the interest anyway. But when we issue our debt, issuing debt means we go to LGFA and we draw down some debt. We always look for the most favourable lending terms and the prices. We're governed by our policy. So the fact that central government may or may not be underwriting our debt, which matures over the next 5 years, is irrelevant for us when we manage the council's debt. We're always looking to borrow at least cost on the most favourable terms, and we'll continue to do that.
Thanks.
Great, thanks, Councillor Cooper. I think that's all of our questions. So is there someone who would like to move recommendations on page 46? There's just the one recommendation. Councillor Wilson, seconded by Councillor Coe. Right of introduction? No? Cool. Yeah. Is there any debate? Any comments anyone would like to make? No, I think we're good. I just wanted to acknowledge back in 2021, Councillor Elliott and I wrote to the Shareholders Council, the LGFA Shareholders Council, around the real absence of climate and sustainability within the statement of intent and some really clear measures against which LGFA could assess how well they were doing. And so it's great to see how far you've come. We had a really awesome conversation with Martin Reid, who was at the time, and I believe still might be, the Wellington rep on the LGFA Shareholders Council. So I just wanted to acknowledge the work that has been done to really incorporate that, because we had a really positive experience in shaping what some of the things that are now included. So just wanted to mention that. Any other comments? No? Cool. Oh, yeah. Just briefly.
And I don't want to take anything away from the comments you just made, because that was an excellent piece of work that's been done to that. I just still have a little bit of a problem with regards to Auckland pulling out of LG&Z and it not being penalised in this regard. So I just wanted to voice that and take that on board, as you will. But there needs to be consequences for those sorts of decisions and those sort of actions, in my opinion.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Councillor Halliday. Cool. All those in favour? Against? That's carried. Thank you, Andrew, for your time, and thanks, Mark, for joining us online. Thanks also, Jing.
Thank you.
Kāpiti, thank you. Do people need a quick morning tea break? Yeah, let's have a cup of tea and stretch to the legs.